Hey folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue number 15, and okay, so this fellow, this Tim Follin, he's good at not so much the tunes, but the technology behind the tunes, and he helped make Rock and Roll Racing for the Super Nintendo, which sounded awesome. It sounded really like you were listening to those rock and roll tracks of the past. And this Charles Demon, he made the music to the Lost Vikings. Which is kind of out of place because Lost Vikings is the music is very techno. It's very upbeat. So, but great composing there. So we were going to talk about the Revival of the Fittest, another very biased article by Edge Magazine. And the gist of the article is that the oldest games had the best gameplay, and I believe it was triggered due to Tempest 2000 being so awesome, but nevertheless still very much like the old arcade game. And so they also talk about Pitfall, which also had a re-release in late 1994 for the Super Nintendo and Genesis, maybe the Amiga. And yeah, they reminisce about how the original Pitfall was a better game. Well, it was better in sales, and it was relatively better than anything else at the time, but to say Pitfall, the original, is better than the Pitfall released in 1994, which was a pretty good game. Nothing to complain about. I don't know what they're trying to say with that. The original Mission Impossible for the Commodore 64, great game, ahead of its time. Apparently there was an Amiga version released later that wasn't that good. I've never played it, so I can't comment on that. They'll talk about Donkey Kong being re-released for the Game Boy. For the Game Boy, and used this on the Super Game Boy. And well, Donkey Kong is fine, especially for 1981. But the Game Boy version has a lot more levels, and it's a more interesting game. Really, there are more power ups. There's just more going on. So, but what really rubs my back the wrong way is how. They say, pure gameplay was found on the computer-like systems in the early 80s, and then Nintendo and Sega came, and they came with the consoles, and they basically say, then everything started to be about graphics and less about gameplay. Now, I'm the first person to admit that graphics get in the way for good gameplay, but we're going to have to be honest here. The Nintendo and the Super Nintendo Genesis had some of the best gameplay of all time. I actually see it as the peak, and it wasn't until around 2010 that people started reinventing the excellent gameplay of the early 90s. So, they put the blame on 16-bit technology for getting in the way for the awesome gameplay of the old games, and I don't believe that was the case. I believe that games like Super Metroid are the epitome of excellent gameplay, and that what would happen soon after 1994 with the advent of the CD-ROM and polygons, that gameplay would take a hike and come second place to great visuals. But that's my view. Maybe if I was 10 years older, I would share this view that Edge has. But I do know that if you go on the internet and you look at Let's Plays, you're going to find a lot more Super Nintendo games than Commodore 64 games and Atari 2600 games. Okay, so Magic Carpet being released, and it's a bit of a confusing game because you're flying around and shooting things and you're building things at the same time, and it's not clear what you're supposed to be doing. But it looked great and had a lot of different spells to use. So if you could figure out what you were doing, you would have a blast. It's even better against each other, although Doom is a better game for that. So Edge gives it a 9. I think it's a little bit high, but I agree with them. So, and what of Peter Molyneux's finest moments? We have Ecstatica, another survival horror game released before Resident Evil. This is by the makers of Alone in the Dark 1. And it uses ellipsoids, I think they're called. So everything has these spheres. Of course, the backgrounds use polygons, but the characters actually do the moving during the game. They're made of these round circles. And I've never played this game. Edge gives it an 8, fairly high. And well, it's more or less the same as Alone in the Dark, actually. Walking around, solving puzzles, and awkward combat, trying to get to the end. Micro Machines 2, talking about excellent gameplay, gets an 8. And you can play this game with 8 people at the same time. You know, 2 people on one joypad and then using the multi-tap, so 4 people play at the same time, so 8 at the same time. Yeah, it's a very simple but effective racing game made by Codemasters, who would go on to make the Colin McRae games and Dirt and maybe some other games. Wasn't Drive Club made by them? Don't know. So yeah, but it's more of the same. Yeah, what can I say? Edge is kind of weird. They don't mention all the other games for the 16-bit consoles because they're not interesting enough, but they do review Micro Machines 2, which is so close to the original. They don't even mention it in the review. It's just more of the same, but yeah, different levels. Hey, FIFA Soccer for the 3DO. And it's a good game. It gets a 7. But you won't play it nowadays because it's not that good. And they praise the camera angles, which got you into the game. So 3DO having all these fairly good games, actually, being reviewed by Edge. Unfortunately, not a success. So, giving reminiscence of older games, they discuss Mercenaire, released in 1986, I believe. Yeah, 1986 it says. And believe it or not, this was the first Grand Theft Auto-like game. Now, don't expect to be able to do as much as in Grand Theft Auto, but yeah, you could walk around and steal stuff and steer away from the objective. Now, the frame rate is horrible, and graphics don't look that very well either, but hey, this was released for the Commodore 64, so that's very impressive. And it also made its way to the Amiga, of course, and the Atari ST, Amstrad, and Atari 400 even. So, if you're a video game historian like me, it's worth checking this game out. You can watch videos on YouTube. And remember, this game was released 2 years after Elite. So, I hold Elite in very high regard, because that was a game full of freedom and a lot of choices. Mercenary didn't add much more to that, except it's mostly just on the ground, so it felt more like real. And you can go into buildings, if I recall correctly. But still, worth mentioning, Mercenary. Burn Cycle getting a commercial for the CDI. Let's see. Getting to the end of the magazine. You have the charts, Mega CD. I don't think Night Trap made it. Nope. Night Trap could be officially dead now. Let's look at the US. We have Road Rash for the 3DO, number 1. Can you believe a Road Rash game, a 3DO game being number 1 in the US? I don't trust these charts, to be honest. Because you also have Breath of Fire 2, but they mentioned Genesis. I don't know what's up with that. Or maybe there is a Breath of Fire 1 for the Genesis that suddenly made to number 2, but I won't believe that. But look, you also have Mega Man 4, which was released in 1991 or 1992 in America. And then 5th place? No, this can't be true. So let's look at Japan. Well, we have Mother 2, a.k.a. Earthbound number 1. Breath of Fire for the Super Famicom. There must have been Breath of Fire 2, by the way. Part 1 wasn't that good, but Part 2 is one of the best role-playing games ever. At least when it comes to Japanese RPGs. And Edge Read is looking forward to Cruising USA, Ridge Racer, Virtual Fighter, Little Big Adventure, and Heart of Darkness. Uh-oh. People, well, to be fair, most of the games people wanted to see in Most Wanted have not been hits, except the racing games, maybe the fighting games. Iguana, they worked on NBA Jam, I remember that. So, you have R.J. Michael, who has worked on a lot of interesting things. He helped make the Lynx for Atari, and later on the 3DO. And he knows a lot about making systems, but he doesn't know very well about how to sell to the market. Very good at technology. And Yeah, I really like this guy while reading about it, but I don't recall him saying very interesting things. So, yeah, he's also looking forward to one unified medium, which might become the PC one day. If people don't buy the PlayStation 4, what's the new version? The one with the higher resolution? And the newest Xbox. Q&A. Yeah, I read this a couple days ago, and I've already forgotten what was in here. And trust me, it wasn't that interesting. More technical questions about how do games work. So, I like this picture of the PlayStation 1 controller without the cord. And the color, it's a bit whiter than normal. So, and that's Edge Magazine number 50. Next time we'll be talking about the Saturn again. So, that could be promising. Maybe not. And do we get the Black Traditionals cover back? No, of course not. We get a list of what's in the magazine. Well, you've just heard that. So, I'll see you next time at Edge number 16. Have a nice day.